In this video, I just want to say a quick word about equilibrium and surplus, consumer surplus and producer surplus. Remember that consumer surplus is the difference between what consumers are willing to pay and the price they have to pay, whereas producer surplus is the difference between the price that sellers receive and the lowest price they would have been willing to accept. In Chapter 3, when we were just looking at these curves individually, we would pick some price along the demand curve or along the supply curve, and we would calculate what the consumer surplus was or the producer surplus was. When you've got a market in equilibrium, equilibrium determines what the surplus is for each side of the market. So if you take the intersection of supply and demand, draw a line to it, and you've got the equilibrium price. That equilibrium price is simultaneously determining what producer surplus, that's consumer surplus, and what producer surplus is. And consumer surplus is going to be all of this area below the demand curve, above the price, and to the right of the y-axis. Consumer surplus. Producer surplus is going to be everything below the equilibrium price and above the supply curve to the right of the y-axis. Okay? And so now notice that area was all of the available gains from trade, and the equilibrium price tells you how much of the available gains from trade will go to the buyers, how much of it will go to the sellers. Now, in this graph, consumer and producer surplus are equal to each other, or at least roughly equal to each other. But that doesn't have to be the case. It's true here because the slope of the supply curve and the slope of the demand curve are of the same magnitude. It's just this is a positive slope and that's a negative slope. But if, let's say, the supply curve was much steeper than the demand curve, then that would affect how much of this surplus went to producers and how much went to consumers. If the supply curve was up here, the price would go there, and so there'd be a smaller amount going to the consumers and a larger amount going to the producers. If, on the other hand, the supply curve was quite a bit steeper than the demand curve, now the price would end up here at the new intersection of supply and demand, and the amount going to consumers would increase, the amount going to producers would, at least in relative terms, would decrease. All right? So that is the relationship between equilibrium and the division of surplus.